throughout history, people have been obsessed with things they can't explain. I think sometimes the facts that are behind these stories, they end up being creepier and more fun than the stories themselves anyway. So maybe lifting the curtain is worse in some ways, because it's more scary.
Welcome to a bonus edition of the Black Tapes podcast. This is Alex Reagan, and today I had the pleasure of interviewing author and podcaster Aaron Mahnke. When the Black Tapes podcast launched at the end of May, there was another new podcast about the paranormal consistently climbing up the charts on iTunes. That podcast is Lore. Its host has captured the imagination of listeners around the world. With Lore, Mahnke delves into the complex history and interesting characters associated with various compelling myths and legends. He has a new novel coming out on July 27th called Grave Suspicion. He was kind enough to speak with us today via Skype from his studio in Massachusetts. How are you doing?
I'm well, thank you. How are you?
I'm doing well. I'm excited to talk about your podcast and your novels.
Thanks, yeah.
So you've published 2 novels so far. Your third novel, Grave Suspicion, comes out on July 27th. Can you tell us about that one?
Yeah, so the book is called Grave Suspicion. It's like the 2 before it. It's a supernatural thriller. This one takes a bit of, I'd say, the Da Vinci Code and a bit of Stephen King, kind of mixes them all together. The story follows Sam Hawthorne. He's a man who's spent a good part of his life wandering through the Midwest, trying to build a life. And things happen in his life on a pretty regular basis. And these things make it hard for him to settle down and fit in. Makes it kind of difficult. So when we meet Sam, he's learning about why those things are happening. And once he learns, things get worse progressively after that. So the novel follows Sam kind of into a strange new world. It's full of, I would say, equal parts wonder and danger. And I'm honestly not sure if he makes it out alive.
That's great.
I mean, I actually do know because I wrote it, but
Now, if we move over to your podcast, Lore, which is fantastic. I'm a big fan.
Oh, thank you.
I went through all of them in a weekend. What originally drew you to these types of paranormal stories and their histories?
Well, so my fascination with the paranormal, I would say, goes back to childhood. I mean, I grew up watching Unsolved Mysteries, with, I think that was Robert Stack, and people vanishing. I remember buying books through the Scholastic catalog that would come home from school, like ghost stories and things like that.
Right.
And that's where it was back then. But over the years, it kind of spread into cryptozoology and other supernatural concepts. So Bigfoot gets thrown in there for a lot of people, and then you move on to other things. And it's just a rich area of study. And I think the best part is that it's not an invention of modern times. Throughout history, people have been obsessed with things they can't explain. Right. So for me, it's really about the people and why they choose to believe the things that they do believe. I don't make attempts to disprove anything on my podcast. I'm not here to debunk someone's closely held beliefs. I just want to explore what it is that people think is real and look at the historical information that helps, prop up these beliefs, and then ask the question, why? Why this myth? Why this monster? What do those beliefs, and what do they say about us as people, as human beings?
Right. And how do you feel like you straddle the line between truth and fiction when it comes to your own, when it comes to your 2 professions? So on the one hand, you've got the podcast where, you're talking about this sort of psychology of belief. And and then as a writer, you're often compelling the reader to suspend their disbelief. Do you enjoy one side more than the other, truth or fiction? And considering stories of the paranormal are so much fun, are you ever afraid of lifting the veil to your listeners?
That's a good question. Like I said, I don't focus my podcast on debunking myths per se. So I guess, that's a place where I like to explore them as far as that side of my writing and creativity. I get to explore those concepts. Sometimes in the act of, looking at the real hard facts, sometimes it's super clear to me and my listeners that there's a lot more fantasy going on than reality, But sometimes it's not so clear. And I try not to judge either way. I'm interested in the facts and the implications. So for my fiction, I do have a lot more freedom, absolutely. And I really enjoy that. I get to take readers to a place or to a belief where they wouldn't normally allow themselves to go. And that's really fun, that I get to, like you said, suspend that disbelief and say, hey guys, just for the next few hours, let's pretend that these things are real and ask the question, what if, And I've read that Stephen King begins a lot of his novel planning by sitting down with that question, what if? Not, let me craft this masterful plot. He just asks that question, what if? And so, I don't know. I don't know that there's a risk of me lifting the veil and spoiling the fun, like some sort of Wizard of Oz, man behind the curtain moment.
Right.
I think sometimes the facts that are behind these stories, they end up being creepier and more fun than the stories themselves anyway. So maybe lifting the curtain is worse in some ways, because it's more scary.
Very true. I could be wrong, of course, but I get a sense from your podcast that you don't necessarily believe in the existence of paranormal phenomena. Are you a skeptic when it comes to the supernatural?
I'm not sure I would say that I'm a skeptic. I mean, there are some really weird things out there, and I find it hard to fall down, on one camp or another, black and white. Are these things made up and make-believe without a doubt? I don't know if anybody can say that for certain. There are just too many unanswered questions out there. Are a lot of the stories of the paranormal super easily disproven? Absolutely. But there's always a small group of the tricky ones, There's the ones that don't want to go away, and the ones that are just too hard and sometimes impossible to debunk. And I think there'll always be stories like that.
Right. Well, we'll keep telling them.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I like doing it.
And finally, I'm not sure I personally believe in paranormal phenomena. So I love to listen to ghost stories, and I don't necessarily get super scared, but there's something about demons and the occult that really disturb me. And I'm wondering, in your experience, is this type of disparity between fear of ghosts and fear of the occult common? It
is, definitely. And, there seems to be an invisible line that separates a lot of the subject matter between the two of them. The thing that I've really begun to understand and also just believe in my core is that stories are really about something else. So stories about vampires, they're about vampires, but they're about more than that. They're about our obsession with immortality, and they're about our fear of death and how fragile our lives are. So demon stories, I think at their core, they're about control, and that's what frightens people the most. Losing control of your own body, that you become possessed and something else can pull the strings and drive your life and break your life into pieces, perhaps. So I think that's what's maddening about that topic to think about, that you could lose control of the thing that you hold most precious, which is your own life. So in that sense, I mean, I can completely agree. That's the kind of stuff that frightens me too.
Well, I guess it's sort of like what you're getting at is really fundamental and less about ghosts themselves and demons themselves, and perhaps that's an ongoing conversation that you could take forever.
Oh yeah, I mean, absolutely. And and the idea that some stories begin to explain just the brokenness of human nature. Werewolf stories coming out of early Europe, where serial killers were, the story of the werewolf of Bedburg is just fascinating, and how the stories were kind of elaborated and airbrushed on to explain how in the world could somebody be so cruel. Well, of course he was a werewolf. That's why they become this thing that helps us cope with how cruel reality can be sometimes. So yeah, at the end of the day, after I finish doing episodes, I just finished writing one this afternoon. There's always a bigger question that needs answered. There's always that one that I have to step back and ponder a little bit. Why in the world would people act this way?
Right. Fantastic. Well, on that note, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us.
Yeah, no worries.
I look forward to more lore podcasts and Grave Suspicion when it comes out later this month.
Thanks, I appreciate that.
All right. Take care.
You too.
Bye, Aaron.
Bye.
Thanks again to Aaron Mahnke. His novel, Grave Suspicion, comes out on July 27th. We'd like to thank everyone for donating to our Kickstarter. We're only days away from the end of our campaign, so if you enjoy the Black Tapes podcast, please tell everyone you know. And if you have a moment, we'd love a review on iTunes. Reviews help keep our show on the charts where more people can find us. So, until next time, I'm Alex Reagan. It's the Black Tapes podcast. We'll be back again soon.